wrote a letter to Santa Claus. He wrote me back. The return address was listed as hell. Growing up with a drug addict's mother and an abusive alcoholic father, I never felt love. I didn't believe true happiness ever existed. If it did, it wasn't something that I was ever meant to have. But that didn't stop me from craving it. My mother, she was the verbally abusive one. My father, however, he was the alpha of the physical, and I was his target. I don't know if they were ever kind to me or ever tucked me in, kissing me on my forehead after a bedtime story, telling me they loved me. But I had hoped that things would get better. I always looked forward to Christmas. It was the only time my mom would get clean, as we would be having guests over. She would walk thousands of miles to cover up her disgusting addiction, especially to her heavily religious mother, who would deem her unfit to raise a child. My father, he never got along with my mother's side of the family. I mean, not after Alice, my mother's late sister. She and my dad were close. Too close, some would say. She became pregnant but refused to give up the identity of the father. Shortly after the baby's birth, my father and her stopped speaking altogether. A year later, she died in a car crash. Judy, my other aunt, then went on to raise her child. Since then, during Christmas, my dad would lock himself in the basement, flooding his bloodstream with a toxic chemical. My mother's family would arrive from Europe a week early. I would enjoy every moment of playing with my cousins. When they would come over, they would tell me about what they had asked Father Christmas for, and always try and convince me to write a letter, and if I had been good, then Santa would deliver. I didn't believe in the magic of Christmas, or even understand how one man could travel around the whole earth in one night, going down each individual chimney, but I thought that it wouldn't hurt to try. I took a sheet of paper and went to work scribbling what I wanted for this one Christmas. And if he gave it to me, I'd never ask for anything else ever again. Dear Santa, I hope this letter finds you well, if it finds you at all. For this one Christmas, I don't want any gifts, or clothes, or money. I just want for my parents to love me. I want my mom to be clean, permanently, and my dad to be sober, to rediscover the joys of life, rediscover the life they made. If not, I want to know what love feels like, what it's like to be wanted. Merry Christmas, and best wishes, Susie. I folded the paper in half and placed it into an envelope, neatly jotting the address my cousins had told me to mail it to. I placed it into the mailbox and continued with my day. The night before Christmas, my dad came home from work and immediately headed to the kitchen to fetch his bourbon. If it wasn't the popping of the bottle that gave it away, then it was the thick aroma that traveled around the house. The devil's cup of tea. With the heaviness in his footsteps and the silence in his voice, my mother and I both knew to stay out of his way. He emerged from the kitchen with fury in his eyes and tightly gritted teeth. He stared me down. I saw the devil in his soul. He walked past us into the back garden shed. Me and my cousins resumed our childish activities. But if only we knew the horror that awaited us that evening. In one swift kick, the door was taken off its hinges by a metallic, steel-tipped boot. A cold winter's wind rushed in, sucking the heat out of the front room. All heads simultaneously turned in the direction of the commotion. My father was towering over, dressed in all black, wearing the same demonic expression that he had on from when he first exited the kitchen. He was holding a large tray axe and a hunting rifle.
Susie,
he called out in a psychotic, sarcastic, menacing tone. With the sign in front of me and the sound of my name in a deranged man's discombobulated speech, my legs turned to jelly and I wet myself.
Oh, look at the pissy pants.
My dad mocked, taking steps closer to me. He placed the axe on the dining room table and reached behind his back to grab something. I was sure it was a pistol. He was gonna finish me right then and there. What he revealed was a folded piece of paper.
Let's find out what darling Susie thinks about her dear parents.
He was drunk. The alcohol clung to the inside of his mouth like leeches sucking on a blood victim.
Dear Santa,
he read, with the alcohol slowing down the functions of his brain.
For Christmas, I want my alcoholic waste of space father to sober up and stop cheating on mommy. I want my junkie of mother to stay clean and treat her only child as if they mean something. My parents' addictions are getting worse. It's only a matter of time before Dad loses his job and starts pimping me and my mother out to feed their disgusting habits. I just want to be wanted. Want to be loved.
I looked at him baffled, whilst my mother eyeballed me from the corner of her eye, a tear rolling down her cheek. I could tell those words cut her deeply.
Little bitch doesn't think we love her, Janet,
he said, taking a swig of his crazy juice.
The little bitch wants dear old daddy to stop drinking and crackhead mommy to stay clean.
With every word, he took a step closer to me.
The little bitch wants to feel wanted.
That's enough, Marcus, my mom said. You're drunk. Let me help you to bed.
Who the fuck would ever love a fucking pissing pants?
My dad screamed, cutting my mother off. At this point, he was in my face screaming. All I could do was hold my head down and hope that the beating would be over fast. He raised his rifle to my forehead. As I felt the cold metal make contact with my skin, I looked up. His soul had become corrupt. His eyes glossed over in black. A small, maniacal smile of pure evil stretched across his face. My mom and aunt instantly jumped into action. My mother tried to calm the situation by reasoning with him, but his gaze was fixed, and his mind was made up. My auntie tried escorting me and her children into another room, whilst grabbing the phone to call 911. 911,
what is your emergency?
That's when the first shot rang out. Me and my cousins watched on in horror as Judy collapsed onto the carpet. A pool of blood expanded around her. She was still alive, with a massive hole in her stomach. She tried crawling away to save herself, but my father was hot on her heels, and he had no intentions of leaving any survivors. He stood less than 2 feet away from her. She begged for her life. In response, my father held up the wood-chopping machinery before swinging down with all his might, imploding the blade into her skull. Mason let out a mortifying cry. Mommy! My mum stumbled back in shock or fear. I couldn't tell which one, maybe both. My dad snapped his head in our direction, like a deer caught in the headlights. As he did, my mom regained control of her senses, immersed in front of him, possibly trying to protect us from his wrath. My dad retreated a couple steps, picking up his glass bottle, shattering it in the center of her face. Showers of glass penetrated her eyes. Blood flowed from her nose like a burst dam. The darkness that had consumed his eyes had flushed out his mind and replaced it with a homicidal maniac's. He lifted his rifle and aimed it at my mum's head like she was a wild animal being hunted and it had met its maker. Another ear-splitting bang rang out, and then silence. I didn't need to look. I could tell with the terminated, painful screams that she was dead. My only thought was, which one of us is he gonna gun down next? He stood over her cold-ending corpse, unmoving. The only way I could tell that he wasn't a statue was because of the wind making his body sway. His black, sinister eyes resumed to their natural state of chestnut brown. My love, he uttered in horror as he had realized the irreversible crime that he'd just committed. Tears trickled down his cheek, knowing that he had ended his soulmate. He held the rifle up to his chin, and the final gunshot rang out that night. 2 years later, my grandmother was awarded custody of me and my 3 cousins. Mason never really recovered from seeing his mother slaughtered. He went through multiple counseling sessions, but they were of no help. After all other options were exhausted, he was placed into a special asylum for kids and doped up on drugs to try and help him suppress his memory. But all that they really did was trip him out, leaving the mindless shell of a boy I once knew. One Christmas, I received a letter through the mailbox. I opened it, expecting it to be another Christmas card for one of our neighbors. It read, "Dear Susie, 12 years ago today, you wrote me on this date. You had little faith in your splintered spirit, didn't have hope that things would get better, but you asked me anyway, and I delivered. I wrote and sent your father that letter that sent him over the edge. If things went south, I was gonna protect you and your cousins, for no child should come under harm. And since then, I've watched for the first time as you were able to live a life full of love and happiness, just like every other child deserves. You grew up, found peace, gave your child a life completely different from your own. There were so many different ways that I could have gone about it, but I did the best, long-lasting solution in my opinion. You would have never been happy with them, so I took them away. Susie, never write to me again, for I am not who you think, for Santa does not exist. I am the devil, and I am a demon. I do no good. That night, it wasn't the alcohol that sent your father over the edge, nor was it so much that letter, for the poison I dripped in his air. It was only a matter of time before the massacre unfolded, so why not sooner rather than later, when less lives would be impacted? You are too pure to get caught up in the darknesses of this universe. If you reach out again, I will own your soul, and after you pass, you'll be burning in an unforsakable heat, just like your parents who burned beside me. Their selfish behaviors have not only impacted you, but cost the life of your aunt and the sanity of her son. But dear child, do not blame yourself, for it is not your fault. They had their whole lives to do good, and they chose opposite. They had years of your life to show you love, and they did not. Your auntie was collateral damage, but she is in heaven now, where pure souls belong. Merry Christmas from the Prince of Darkness.